Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, or wherever you are. My name is Claudia Mitchell, and
I'm Katie.
So just so you know our voices, we're going to be going back and forth in this webinar. And maybe just to say that we believe that many qualitative researchers who are not in film studies or in media studies are often daunted by the idea of video production in research. And so our goal today is to assure you that a no editing required approach is very doable and a very good first step. So to do this, we're going to take you through the process of a no editing required approach to video making. And just there's our faces, so you can see that we are there.
We have heads.
Yeah, we have heads. And here is just a brief outline of what we hope to cover. We're going to say a little bit about participatory video itself. We're going to talk about technology. We're going to give you a case study. We're going to go through 9 steps for conducting a no editing required approach. We're going to talk about some variations. We'll talk a little bit about genres, audience, and aesthetics, visual aesthetics, and then working with the data. And then we'll close with talking a little bit about some of the resources. So, what is participatory video? We think it's very important to say a little bit about the whole area of participatory video before we talk about a no editing required approach, just so that you have a sense of what we're talking about. Participatory video is a participatory visual methodology in which a group or a community creates their own films or their own videos in order to voice their concerns or to explore a particular issue. We see this whole area of participatory video as very much part of the broader area of visual methodologies, including photo voice, digital storytelling, and other areas where the use of digital media is regarded as a tool for social change. We wanted to say just a few words about where we think this work comes from. We would be remiss if we did not make a comment about the National Film Board of Canada and their work in the late 1960s on Fogo Island, which was one of the first large-scale projects of thinking about how video could give a voice to community members. That project, which went on for a number of years and also moved to the Arctic and other areas, used film and video, now known as the Fogo Process, to shine a light on the social concerns of communities, of community members. And the ultimate goal of this work was to have video and the voices of communities reach government leaders and decision makers to consider how these issues might be changed. So we think that's a very important component throughout the whole process. For us, the idea of technology then, and how to make this doable, how to make it possible, how to make research democratic, has very much to do with the idea of what technology is available to everyday people. And in the 1960s, this was still relatively an inaccessible project that required filmmakers to be working alongside people. But now, as you'll see in the next slide, technology is available to everybody. And we just put together five images with everything from cell phones, as you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, to the use of kind of your basic digital camera that can do photographs or take videos, through to the mid image, which shows a group of young people with a camcorder on a tripod, over to the top side where somebody's using an iPad tablet, and then moving down to the bottom where we actually have someone using a drone where they are doing some community-based research. And all of those technologies are very available, not necessarily available to every single person in all communities, but much more accessible. And we wanted you to kind of see this image so that as we're talking about the kinds of steps and the kinds of issues, that you'll have a very good idea of what this no editing required can be in the context of everyday technology. So now what we're going to do is look at a participatory video no editing required project in action. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Claudia. So Yeah, I thought that just to give everybody an example of, or a case study as we've called it here, would be to look at some of my doctoral research, which involved using cell phones to talk about, cell phones and gender-based violence in rural South Africa. So this was work that I did with a group of high school learners, so 7 girls and 2 boys. And what we did was we made short videos. I left what I wanted to do was come in there with leaving the process as sort of as open as possible for them to make videos that they felt were important to them. So what I did was I introduced a prompt, which you can see on the screen here written on the board, telling stories about cell phones in schools. And just a brief overview of the process, and we're going to tell you a little bit more in depth about that in a second, but we brainstormed ideas about this prompt. So the youth came up with ideas of what they might talk about in relation to the prompt, and then they did a storyboard, which is the next picture here on the slide, which was basically a visual map of the individual participants' idea of how they might see a video coming together. So that's drawing out the pictures scene by scene to create a narrative. And then with some introduction to how to use cell phones to actually make cell films is what we're calling them. So that's cell phone plus film equals cell film. We headed out to actually take the videos. So this process we did in about, I met with them, I think they made about 11 videos over 2 days. And in particular for this work, which was interesting, was that the girls in the group, the majority of them all chose to make videos about gender-based violence. So this was not necessarily something that was prompted of them in the process, but that's something that they brought up themselves as an issue that was important to them. So we just thought that would be a really good example to give and show how this sort of democratic process comes together. And also this idea that we can use the technology that is also under investigation through the research process to sort of take a critical eye on this technology. And what the young people did was that they were able to make these films with beginning at the beginning of the video straight to the end without any type of editing that was required. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how to do that in a second. So, Claudia.
And maybe just to say a few words about some of the other projects that we have worked on. I know there are people out there who are working in health and education and many other areas of qualitative research. We've used this process of no editing required for 10 years. Started it out in South Africa at the Center for Visual Methodologies for Social Change. Since that time, we've worked with community healthcare workers to get at what they see as some of the critical issues in relation to HIV and AIDS. We've worked with rural teachers who have considered poverty. They've looked at youth sexuality. We've worked with women principals, school principals, and the notion of shattering the glass ceiling. In the image that you see on your screen right now, this is a youth-led participatory video project in an Inuit community in Labrador, in Rigolet. And if you want to visit this video later, it's called Life in Rigolet. One of my master's students, Joanna McDonald, headed up this project. And although you will see in the video some uses of some editing along the way, the basic process that we will be talking about in going from the storyline through to final production and screening was very much the same. So those are just some pieces that you could follow up and maybe to encourage you to think that this is something that people have been doing for a good long time with some success in terms of the process and engaging the local communities. So Katie, over to you.
So in general, we tend to follow 9 steps in how we approach making the videos. And what we wanted to do was just lay them out for you here to begin with. So obviously introducing the filmmaking process, going into some visual ethics of what it means to actually make videos and who's going to be in them. The prompt, which I mentioned before in relation to my work, as well as the brainstorming and storyboarding work. And then we tend to usually take a step back with the group and look at the process and where we're going and where we've come from before we jump into the filming process, then screening the videos, and then reflecting on what we've seen on the screen. So if we look more closely at these steps, we've set out times here that would fit within a 4-hour workshop, but obviously they would have to be adapted to the context, the community, and the timeline that you have. But the introduction to the filmmaking process is basically an introduction to the research process itself and what people are going to be expected to do and what are the expected results. And then giving some ideas of basically how to make a shot. So going over framing of the video shot and what's in the screen and what's left out of the screen. And then also introducing the film equipment is always a really important part. The visual ethics we'll talk a little bit more about later, but just to say that it's important to introduce the idea of visual ethics before people actually go out into the field to make their videos. And then the prompt, which I also mentioned before, was this idea of how to get all the videos to start talking about sort of the same idea. And this can range from anything to an open-ended in my life or feeling strong or not so strong to a more specific solution aimed to the videos.
So moving into step 4, as you heard from Katie, these are pieces that are really meant to highlight what local communities want they want to voice their concerns about, and we see it very much as a small group project. There are lots of adaptations along the way, but our 9 steps are very much organized around small groups. So the piece that follows, obviously follows the kind of like the broader area, is to actually have groups working together to brainstorm their ideas. And this is really brainstorming the ideas around the prompt. So there's already, it could be, as we said, very open-ended, as in my life, what would you like to write about or make a video about, or something very, very specific. But it's like, what does this group see as some of the critical issues along the way? We try to think about this as a democratic process, and if we were able to show you a video here, which we can't today, but we usually have a scene where, when we're highlighting the process, we show people voting. Often just going up and looking at a chart and putting a marker on or a sticker on to show what they would like to do. So the idea that people have some say. The next step is the actual storyboarding process. And again, you have the same small groups working together. And for us, we see this as being probably the biggest part of the process. Many young people now, many old people now, have access to cell phones and other technology, so they might be very comfortable with the technology, but they've never planned out a story, or they've never planned out a concept for an idea for a video. So this, we put down 55 minutes. It can be longer, but not much shorter, because you need to give people this opportunity to think through, okay, from this theme, from this topic, how are we going to be working on this? And I'm just going to move to another screen for a second here, which I just skipped. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. You saw a storyboard in Katie's case study, but this is just, again, an example where people went from beginning to end. We usually give people a sheet of paper divided into 9 or 10 boxes, but they can draw it out. You could use a flip chart, any range of ideas. But the point is for people to think through, what are we going to try to do here? What's our theme? What are our issues? What's our title? How are we going to start this? What's going to be the beginning part of this story or this topic? And how are we going to end it? If we're developing credits, how are we going to put down the list of names? And I emphasize all of this because in a no editing required approach, you have to know all of these from the beginning. You have to know have to have your title written out from the beginning. You have to have all of these ready. The good thing about a no editing required approach, as we look at it, is it's often people are often working on very short videos. So if it's a 3-minute video and somebody messes up along the way, there's no problem starting all over again, but you can't go back. So we really emphasize that. The planning of this, the thinking through. We'll say a little bit more about the types of genres people make films about later, but it's that idea of to really have a concept in mind. Where does it start? Where does it end? And think that out. So that it's very much a carefully controlled process to think through what this story might look like. Now, I'm just going to attempt to go back. So the final, and one more. So after people have done their storyboarding and considered the genre that they're doing, their audiences, their title, thinking of those, making just short little stick person scenes or just writing notes. They don't have to be very developed, but getting in their credits. But they've got a plan then for when they actually go off to do their filming. And that's where we usually try to bring the whole group together, even if it's only for 10 or 15 minutes, like all of the small groups, just to kind of make sure that everybody has an idea of where they're going with this, if they're going to be going outside to do their film shoot, some things to take into consideration. And I just want to, we always highlight sound, because this is can be one of the very disappointing aspects of filmmaking for new filmmakers, because they sometimes don't take into consideration that the person filming is a long way from the person who's talking. And then it's very disappointing if you can't hear people. So we really spend a lot of time within the 10 minutes of saying, make sure if someone's talking and it's really important that you've got your microphone is positioned or you're close to them. Are there other people around also filming? Make sure that you're away from that group. And if it's a windy day, be aware of the fact that the wind could be a feature. So those are some stepping back and then stepping forward. Okay.
And then the most sort of exciting and anticipated part of the process sometimes is the actual filming of it. And I know as facilitating this work myself, this is often a time that, whoa, the computer's gone crazy. That I like to step back and really just let the participants do things as much on their own as possible, obviously being there to answer any questions, but that it's a time for people to just become creative and figure out things as they go. But also, and if we're talking about this in terms of doing research specifically, this is an opportunity for myself to really look at how the process is going down and how people are making these decisions, and maybe taking a few pictures or videos myself about how the process is happening. But also to just take a moment to look again at the no editing required approach. So when we're talking about no editing required and how it actually works, the way that the work that I did in South Africa that I was talking about was that the phones that people were using, the cell phones that people were using, allowed them to pause the video. So what they would do is press record on the camera, and then if they press pause, they could actually essentially create a scene change without having to do any post editing. So it becomes a sort of shoot, pause, shoot, pause, shoot, pause. Another way that people have approached this is to just take one long shoot. So press record and then continue until the end of the film, and without pausing at all, and until you press pause at the end, and that's it. So obviously for both of these approaches, it's, as Claudia has already said, you really have to plan out what you're going to do. But if someone does mess up or forget their line or falls over and trips and has a giggle attack, it's also not the end of the world to start all over again. And then we're not sort of hard and fast, we hate editing type people. We do recognize that editing sometimes can be a good step. It's also something that people might be interested in learning about. And just to say that there are a lot of sort of user-friendly editing apps, especially on cell phones, but also available on computers and desktops, such as Cameo, Magisto, Clips is another one, that really allows people to edit clips, add music, put in text and boxes or whatnot very, very easily. So just to say that those are also available. So once the filming is completed, obviously everyone wants to watch the films, and I think that this is a really important step, obviously, because people get to see their finished products, which is very affirming, and also an opportunity to reflect on what's been going on, get a chance to see how other people interpreted the prompt, how does that relate to how they made their films. So getting a perspective on the group aspect of this work. And that brings us into step 9, which is the last step, which is actually reflecting on what people see in the videos, what type of knowledge has actually been produced. So we often will have some prompting questions along that, although discussion might emerge quite naturally from the group. But asking things about, so what did you like best about your video? If you could do something differently next time, what would you do? And again, to get at this idea of social change and how is this video useful and what can we do with these videos, this idea of audiencing and who needs to or who should see this work becomes really, really, really critical here. How can we get these videos out there and seen by people? And then looking again at your larger questions and how does this video address the issues that we're trying to talk and get at here? So this is all part of how we use the videos with the group that we've been working with.
The piece that we don't put as a step, because it's sort of like everything after the workshop, is this question or the issue of screenings. Obviously, this going back to the Fogo process and going back to why we're thinking about doing this work, we think it's very important that the notion of participation and audiences is really taken up in as many different ways as possible. This can obviously range from that the most critical audience are certainly the people who've made the videos in the first place, and that's why we like the large group, as Katie was just talking about. So each individual group is their own audience, but then if you have 30 people or 25 people who've all worked on the same video, same topic or same theme, that's absolutely critical, and how do they want it to go forward. But we think that this notion of getting it out there, and also that the participants themselves have some say about who they think should see these videos, because again, we're talking about ownership, we're talking about how do people feel, quote, empowered in this work, and I think it's really, really important that we don't, as researchers, say, oh, I'm going to show this at such and such a conference, or I'm going to show this to the local police force, when that isn't necessarily the group that the participants had in mind for making this. So I want to emphasize that. We think that this notion of going back to when people were actually deciding on what they were going to produce, what kind of a video it was going to be, what genre are they going to use, whose audience, all of those things are very, very important. What's the message they're trying to get across? And we've just listed a few of the genres that we've seen people use over the years, everything from video diaries, a day in the life of, even in 3 minutes, vlogs or video logs, ethnographic documentaries, sort of a journalistic reporting, talk shows, drama, public service announcements. And we've actually seen in a lot of our work in both South Africa and Ethiopia, for example, people are very influenced by melodramas and soap operas as a social change format or genre that's used on television. And so we actually have seen a lot of work there, or this notion of a storyline that leads to a public service announcement. We've also been very interested in looking at how do participants manipulate that genre. Do they reproduce kind of the dominant messages, or do they try to transgress them or try to challenge them in some way? So I think that that's something as researchers that we want to look at. And then there's also just this question about the aesthetics. And we talked earlier about kind of this notion of who's going to watch it, who's going to see it. Some of the work may be not be that sophisticated, or maybe the sound doesn't work that well. So you might have to put in subtitles, or maybe think about, well, who will be influenced by this if they can't hear very well, but the participants themselves are very proud of it in some way. Some of the work that we've seen with smartphones, young people, I think, or teachers, we've seen work with groups who actually produce a very polished piece. So I think that these are questions and issues that we think about as we go along. And again, back to the participants themselves. Who do they want to see this work? How does it translate? Maybe it's best in a small community or a small setting, but maybe these pieces are very sophisticated and they want to see how they can be used in other ways.
Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about visual ethics because it's often an area of a lot of interest for people that are interested in getting into participatory video in general, and it's obviously a contentious issue at that sometimes. So, and it's a large area of study, so there's a lot of people that write about visual ethics in relation to participatory video and in relation to visual methodologies more general. And I think what we see here in terms of the participatory work is that it often goes sort of beyond, or is asking questions beyond what you might see in your regular sort of university ethics boards or institutional ethics requirements and what is considered ethical practice. So there we go. I think we can move that over the way. Yeah, so just in general, we tend to approach this idea of visual ethics as a sort of general, excuse me, I'm just losing my place here a little bit, but as I'm wanting to be ongoing and culturally appropriate. So, so how are participants working together during the research process, and how are we ensuring that everyone's voices are being heard, and that the visual products that are getting produced are actually representative of this sort of collaborative group process? And are things being decided democratically? Is democracy or a democratic decision-making process the best process for this particular community? If we look a little bit about how people are making the films and going out and maybe out into the community to make these films, are they talking to people that aren't directly involved with the project? In which case, do they need to get another form of consent happening, and do participants need to be trained in how to make sure that the people that they may be interviewing, for example, or people that are in the background of the shot, or maybe just someone they wanted to play a certain character in their drama, do they actually realize why they're being videoed and how this might be used in the future? And then trigger warnings is sort of a big issue that's coming to light these days, ensuring both the participant and the audience's safety. So especially in some of the work that I've been doing around transactional sex and gender-based violence, what does it mean, one, for the participants to potentially be playing out scenes that has them enacting rape or being raped, as a group to be filming that process, but also then if we are showing these or screening these videos to community members, what type of, how are we ensuring that the participants' safety is being thought of, and also the people in the audience themselves could be triggered, and so we want to make sure that we're screening these films in appropriate context, with people being aware of what's happening and what they are about to see, and whether that's going to be okay. Ownership and dissemination is another area to keep in mind. So these are a lot of questions that come up with this area that might need to be negotiated within a group while you're doing this work. So who owns these videos? Is it the people that made them, or as researchers, as we're going in, are we going to take these videos out, and is that the best process? And in the same vein, you know, where are we going to store these videos now online? People are often really interested in posting them on social media, which in itself can act as a type of archive. So how do we control access to that? Do we want to keep them private, or do we want to have them publicly available? And how are people consenting to that process? And that all gets into these ideas of how the videos might be used in the future, who's seeing them, how are people maybe allowed to comment on these videos and give feedback and interact with them, and whether people, if they choose that they don't want their video to be involved in the project anymore, can they remove it? Do they have to go through you or through us? Or, you know, if they are posted online, there's an opportunity to maybe link through people's personal YouTube channels, which would mean that they could actually remove their video without having to engage with the researcher, which might be sort of a safety issue for themselves, and certainly a more comfortable issue perhaps. And then a final piece about anonymity. You know, traditionally we're always taught anonymity is sort of the best way to keep everybody's identity secure and to ensure their safety, but participants are often really, really proud of the work that they do, and they want everybody to see it. So how do we give people acknowledgement for the work that they've done, but again also making sure that we're doing this in a safe way? So we might actually want to have people's names associated with their work. Another thing is that we might choose to use pseudonyms. Because it's obviously the visual, you can see identifying characteristics. So how might we avoid that? It might say that we don't want to show people's faces. We could, you know, if we want to talk about body and embodiment, there's other ways to sort of hide identity in the visual format. So just to throw those ideas up there out to you. And a final piece around collaborating, that people, when you're working in a group, can still be involved, but don't necessarily have to be in the camera shot. So there's just lots of different ways that a group might negotiate this idea of anonymity, ownership, dissemination. So those are just some key ideas that we've come across in our work.
So the last point around no editing required that we really wanted to draw attention to today is really working with the data. I mean, this is framed within qualitative research, and the genre or the approach of no editing required doesn't mean that there isn't a whole lot of data that you're going to be working with. And in fact, we have the same type of material that you would be using as if you were working with any other type of participatory visual approach. And in fact, we have on the screen right now the John Fisk's what we call John Fisk's textual triangle. Actually, I think David Buckingham added the term triangle to it. But John Fisk, who has primarily worked in television studies, came up with this notion of these 3 levels of textuality to talk about, and as a way to frame the analysis of media texts, and especially video texts or television texts. And so one area would be the image text. So, and this would be the actual no editing required visual production that comes out of the study. So when Katie was showing the piece on cell phones, the cell films on cell phones, those are the image texts, and she created 11 of those in that 2-day workshop. So she has a lot of visual data that she could look at and analyze, and there it could be everything from doing close readings of the work and drawing very much on the work that Sandra Weber and I have written about in terms of close readings and visual text, through to doing content analysis. There are many, many different ways that you could really just stick with looking at what's in the text. What are the topics? How are the issues being taken up? How do they work? But this is participatory video material. And so you have a whole other area called the producer texts. All those participants, the community healthcare workers, the teachers, the agricultural workers, the young people in Katie's study are all producers. They're all knowledge producers, they're all cultural producers. They worked on producing this video. And so you have all sorts of ways that you can look at that. We had a suggestion earlier of observation as people are in the middle of doing this work, but you have focus groups, you have interviews. Many of the conventional and traditional ways that we do research can be applied to trying to understand, why did you do that? What were you hoping to do? How successful were you? The reflexive questions that come out of working with the videos are all part of the producer texts. And then we come to what we call the audience texts. And we've been very influenced by the work of people such as Gillian Rose, who's written very extensively on the notion of audiencing. And this is a really critical part of the triangle. If people are making videos, they're making them for themselves, they're making them to learn more, they're helping researchers think about the work, but they have particular audiences in mind. There could be the teachers in the school who need to know more about the topic. It could be social workers, it could be policymakers related to school attendance, but this idea of who watches the videos, under what circumstances, what are their responses, how are they thinking about the issues. And I think that this is like such a critical part of participatory video. The idea that the participants themselves, going back to the producer text, have some idea about who they're making the videos for, but these responses and what kind of action. And I think that of all of the areas that has been understudied in the area of participatory visual research, the audience text is one that I think is probably shows the greatest, I think, need for a lot more research. So all of you out there who are working in a whole range of areas, photo, voice, digital storytelling, and no editing required participatory video or edited versions, the notion of the audience text is really critical. And we have written extensively about this work in other areas, and so we will come to resources. This actually brings us to the end of the actual topics that we're thinking about here, but we think that it's really important to highlight that we developed this no editing required method in the first place because we wanted to enable, to make as much as possible participants to have as much say about the making of a video, and it really challenged a mode that we saw very often where people might make the video and then suddenly the researcher or a filmmaker goes off and edits it and comes back and says, oh, here's what your video looks like now. And we don't think that is, there may be reasons why someone might want to do that, but we think that there are so many possibilities for researchers to work alongside communities and for communities themselves to decide how they want to edit, how they want something to look, and how we can help them do that. We think this method of no editing required maximizes control of the participants and the voices of participants, and it minimizes the level of media production and researchers that researchers actually need to know in order to do this work. So we're just going to make a few references to a couple of resources that we think that would be helpful, and then we'll be very happy to answer questions. Katie mentioned, I guess it was mentioned in the introduction, the book, What's a Cell Film? And it's about to come out. It will be out later this year. And so a lot of the work, you can hear that we are very committed to thinking about how cell phones have really revolutionized the possibilities in participatory video. The Handbook of Participatory Video, which I co-edited with E.J. Mill and Nadine DeLonga a couple of years ago, has a lot of different chapters related to power, related to ethics. Those of you who are really intrigued about storyboarding, there's a whole chapter on storyboarding. But I think that this is an area where there's a lot to write about, there's a lot to say, and a lot to explore. If you will wait for 4 days, I think it is on May the 23rd, we are, Marnie Summer, who is at the Columbia Mailman's Public School of Public Health, and I have just co-edited a double-themed issue on in global public health on participatory visual methodologies in global health. This is I think there are something like 18 articles in the issue, and it should be online on May the 23rd. But in that issue, there are lots of references to all of the kinds of topics that we've raised today, including work with participatory video. We'll just a list of some references that you can refer to later. And because we have highlighted cell phones and cell films so much, we actually want to draw attention to an annual cell film festival that we host at McGill University every year. So the next one is December the 1st, 2016. The theme this year will be Exploring Consent, Bodies, Lands, and Media. And this will be up on the website, but we really hope that people will look at this and maybe consider, if you get really involved in and hooked on no editing required, or editing for that matter, with cell films, that you consider thinking about this broader community and think about the audiences that people might reach and how we might think about those. So that's pretty much our webinar on no editing required participatory video. We hope that you have found it to be comforting that you could do this. And we will be posting other resources along the way. If you want to visit the Participatory Cultures Lab website, there are lots of resources there for you as well. And so these are just some of our funders that we've had along the way who have supported our crazy ideas about no editing required. And just to say that this is being very much looked at by global organizations like IDRC, Global Affairs Canada, and Canadian Institutes of Health Research that I think are UNESCO, all of these organizations who are seeing the significance of hearing the voices of everyday people in critical issues related to policy and social change. So now, over to you.
Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Given the problems that we had to connect it earlier, we have to be very careful now with the questions and answers. We only have 5 minutes. Now, Claudia, would it be okay if some questions are not answered here that you follow up by email with the people?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to give the microphone to Laura Yvonne. Laura Yvonne, could you click on the microphone icon next to your name on the control panel? That will allow you to speak out. Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Okay, so I have 2 minutes that maybe I will use one of them.
I will have to mute you. Unfortunately, we cannot understand, but I will read what you wrote, Laura. Laura said the following. Let me see here. What if participants choose that they want to do some editing? Are they given the control to do that too? Can you speak more to what you mean by audience text and how we might do further work in exploring this area? So if you could give a short answer, please, Claudia.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that Katie here, I'll just respond quickly to the editing aspect. Absolutely. I don't think that the no editing required is always the best option, but it's certainly a great way to get people at least even started into thinking visually as well. But if you have a group of participants that are interested in editing, like I said, there are a lot of applications out there, or apps, that make this actually quite easy to do, or it introduces people to how editing might be accomplished, and a lot of these apps are actually free as well, so depending on what type of resources everyone has available. If you have access to Wi-Fi, you can download these apps onto a laptop or a cell phone, and participants can quite easily usually figure these out even on their own or with minimal guidance. So absolutely, there are resources out there for people that who are interested in editing.
Thank you.
So for the audience text question, Laura, by that I just simply meant that in addition to studying who makes the videos, we should study who sees the videos, and so that would be audience. And you know, we built I used to just, when I was putting in a research ethics application, think, oh, well, it's going to be made, and we're going to study that. We're going to study the people who are making it and the themes, but never really thought about how are we going to study who views it. So now I have to put in, and I want to, a whole section in my research ethics applications and in my methodology thinking, okay, are we going to interview people? Are we going to have focus groups? Are we going to have people who talk about the issues in some way? How are we going to follow the audience? And can we also, over time, try to figure out, are there any policy changes that are happening? So audience text can be not only how to interview the principals or the government members. So that type of audience, what does the audience do with the knowledge that they learn or the understanding that they gain from? So we might look around and see where there are changes in the institution itself. So in a project quite recently in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, a group of young women were making cell films about campus safety, and really in that they brought forward some of their policy recommendations to the senior officials, and then they started going around taking photographs of where there had been changes, like there was a dark area of the campus, and they discovered that 4 months later somebody actually fixed the light bulbs and the lights went on, which made it safer. So that audience text is both working directly with interviewing, doing focus groups, or surveys, or a way to get at what people who have viewed the videos might think, but also what have they done. That's helpful.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end, but I would like to say the following. There are 2 or 3 questions that were not answered, but we are going to answer those questions, and the answers will be sent to everybody by email. Okay, so you will all be able to see what Dr. Mitchell has to say about those topics that were left unanswered, or those questions that were left unanswered. Now, I would like to thank everybody and to tell you that the video of this presentation is going to be available on the IIQM website by tomorrow, I believe, at the very latest. I'm going to send you the recording in a few hours or less than that, Yvette, for you to place on the website. And also there you have the PowerPoint. And Claudia, it's my understanding that it includes a bibliography, right?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah. So that answers one of the questions. If the reference that you made to Rose, if the title of that is included there, I suppose it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. So that would be okay. So 2 more questions that were not answered, but we're gonna follow up with you. So I want to give the microphone to Yvette for her to say the last few words. Yvette.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you, Claudia and Katie. That was a great presentation. Just wanted to let everyone know that the Thinking Qualitatively workshop series is taking place June 20th to 24th. There are still many spots available in the over 40 workshops. You can check us out at the IIQM website. Also have abstract submissions open for the Qualitative Health Research Conference taking place this October in Kelowna. So you can submit your abstracts for that on the IIQM website.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Thank you, all of you. Please keep on coming to these webinars. We have had, I counted the other day, more than 30 already. We've been working on this for about 4 years, and we're very excited for the outcome of these webinars. People from all over the world join to listen to people doing interesting work on qualitative methodology. So your support is always appreciated. Tell your students and everybody come. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell and Catherine as well for your presentation. Any last words from you for the people who are here now?
Oh, we just wish everyone all the best, and send in your films to the Cell Film Festival. There are always prizes. It's like, we usually, as qualitative researchers, we get an article published or something like that, but there's big money too. So we do wish you all very well, and thank you for your attentiveness on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Izumi, for your questions. Thank you, Laura, as well, Joe, as well. And all of those questions will be answered. Thank you, all of you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.